Nothing endures but change. You know, that quote, often linked to Heraclitus, feels really spot on right now, doesn't it? Especially when we look at the world stage.
It really does. Things are shifting fast.
Exactly. So welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into a really critical current affairs topic. We're going to unpack the changing dynamics in Syria and the wider Middle East.
Yeah, we're digging into some complex stuff today, looking at the forces at play.
Yeah.
We've been reviewing a few analyses, including a pretty detailed piece from the Middle East Eye.
Right. And our mission really is to try and cut through some of the noise, help you understand what's actually happening there.
What's happening and why it matters.
Precisely. We're zeroing in on the growing roles of Turkey and Qatar in Syria. This seems to be happening particularly under the current Trump administration's approach.
It's a noticeable shift.
Definitely. And if you're trying to get your head around complex international relations, maybe you're prepping for exams, something like the UPSC where you need that nuanced understanding of current affairs.
Or even if you just want to be better informed about a really vital region.
Absolutely. Then this deep dive is for you. We'll break down the key factors, the main players, and honestly, some quite surprising implications of these changes.
Okay, so let's set the scene first. From the U.S. side of things, the sources we looked at, they really emphasize President Trump's stated goal, pull back from Western intervention.
Right, the whole nation-building thing, especially in the Middle East and specifically Syria, he's been quite vocal about wanting less direct American involvement.
Yeah, less military, less political entanglement.
And a key point from the MEE analysis is that instead of just, leaving a void, Trump seems to be leaning really heavily on regional allies.
Turkey and Qatar.
Exactly, Turkey and Qatar. Getting them to step up and handle the tricky details like Syria's reconstruction. It feels like a strategic delegation.
And that hasn't gone unnoticed in the region. The report mentions other Arab officials are talking about the rising stock of Turkey and Qatar.
Rising stock, interesting phrase.
Yeah, and they see it happening directly because, as they put it, Trump doesn't want to intervene. With other global stuff happening, China, Iran talks maybe.
He seems okay empowering allies who'll take a more active role there.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into these two, Turkey and Qatar. What does the analysis say about how they're becoming so central? What are they actually doing?
Well, it seems to be a mix of money and muscle, basically.
Okay.
Qatar is bringing, quote, Qatari gas and cash. Apparently, they started supplying gas to Syria through Jordan back in March.
Gas via Jordan, right.
And get this, along with Saudi Arabia, they're reportedly paying the salaries of Syrian government employees.
Wow, paying salaries. That's not just aid. That's getting really involved in the system, isn't it?
It suggests a pretty deep level of financial commitment, yeah. And influence, presumably.
And Turkey, what's their contribution?
Their side is framed more as Turkish military might. The report says Ankara is even talking with the Damascus government about a defense pact.
A defense pact. Okay. Why now? Well, it's particularly relevant because of the ongoing Israeli airstrikes in Syria, right? So maybe Turkey's looking for a more formal security role there.
It makes sense. And why these two countries? It doesn't feel random.
No, definitely not. Turkey obviously has that huge, long border with Syria, massive security interests there.
Can't ignore geography.
Exactly. And historically, both Turkey and Qatar were kind of the last ones standing among international backers and the anti-Assad rebels, long after others gave up.
Right. They stuck with the opposition.
Yeah. And the MEE piece notes Qatar was unique among Gulf states because they kept recognizing and hosting the Syrian opposition. That gives them a particular kind of standing now heading into this new phase.
Okay, so this is where it gets really concrete, right? The analysis flags a huge development, a $7 billion energy deal signed in May.
Yep, and it explicitly involves the U.S., Turkey, and Qatar, all three.
$7 billion. That's serious money. What's it for?
It's a big infrastructure project, building 4 gas power plants and 1 solar plant, trying to boost Syria's energy supply, which is desperately needed after all the conflict.
Absolutely. And who's leading it?
Qatar's UCC Energy and Construction Company is apparently the lead on that project.
And the U.S. is openly backing this.
Oh, yeah. The report quotes the U.S. envoy, Thomas Barrack, speaking at the signing in Damascus. He praised the alignment of these amazing countries. Pretty strong words.
Alignment of amazing countries. Wow. Did he elaborate on that?
He did, actually.
Yeah.
He sort of framed it in Trump's bigger vision for the region. Said Syria could be a model for empowering local countries to fix historical wrongs.
Historical wrongs, like what?
He specifically mentioned Sykes-Picot. the WWI agreement that carved up the region, including Syria.
Right, the colonial era borders.
Yeah. Barrack apparently said something like, "That mistake cost generations. We will not make it again." Positioning this energy deal, this cooperation, as a way to move past that legacy through, well, commerce and regional partnership.
That definitely fits the Trump administration's sort of pragmatic, business-oriented approach. Let the region handle it.
And it really underscores Ankara's importance here. The analysis points out that Thomas Barrack isn't just the Syria envoy. He's also Trump's ambassador to Turkey.
Oh, interesting. That dual role. That says a lot.
It really does. Signals how key Turkey is in the U.S. thinking on Syria. Robert Ford, the last U.S. ambassador to Syria, he's quoted saying the Trump team seems to understand and respect Turkey's vital national security interest in Syria.
In a way, maybe others in Washington haven't.
That's the implication, yeah, that this administration gets Turkey's perspective more.
Okay, so let's be specific. What is that core Turkish security concern in Syria?
Bottom line, it's the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF.
The group the U.S. partnered with against ISIS under Biden.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
Turkey sees the SDF as basically an extension of the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party.
Which Turkey, the U.S., and the EU all designate as a terrorist group.
Right. So for Ankara, U.S. support for the SDF looks like supporting a group they see as a major terrorist threat right on their border. It's a huge point of friction.
I can see why. It sounds like a fundamental disagreement.
It really is. There's a quote in the report from Bassam Barabandi. He's a former Syrian diplomat. He puts it very bluntly. You can't have a stable Syria without addressing the PKK. The U.S. has to work with the Turks. Otherwise, there will be another war.
Stark warning. So how does this connect to U.S. troops being there? Trump's wanted them out for ages, right? He even caused resignations over it.
He has. Remember, the troops went in originally to fight ISIS.
Right.
But then their mission kind of morphed.
Became more about blocking Iran.
Yeah, denying territory and influence to Iran, especially in eastern Syria.
Oh.
But the analysis suggests that now, with Assad gone Assad being Tehran's close ally, that main reason for keeping troops there to counter Iran, well, it looks weaker from Trump's point of view.
So with Turkey stepping up on security maybe and Qatar providing funds, Trump might see this as his chance to finally pull the troops, even if the SDF or Israel aren't thrilled.
That seems to be the direction things are heading, based on the analysis. Trump himself apparently commented that Turkey has effectively taken over Syria, hinting at this growing relationship with the new leadership.
Taken over Syria. Wow.
And Ambassador Barrack has publicly talked about downsizing U.S. bases in the Northeast significantly, like maybe from 8 down to just 1. So yeah, the wheels seem to be turning.
Okay, this Turkey-Qatar partnership,
Yeah.
it's quite something. The source says they complement each other.
Yeah, it's described as pretty complementary. Turkey has the military clout, but, economic issues at home sometimes. Qatar's incredibly wealthy, big LNG exporter, but small population.
So they fit together well strategically.
It seems that way.
Hmm?
Turkey has a military base in Qatar, which shows the defense link. And remember when Turkey had that big inflation crisis? Qatar pumped in tens of billions in investments, a crucial lifeline for Erdogan.
Right, I remember that. And they have shared history too, right, going back to the Arab Spring in 2011.
They do. Both countries strongly backed the popular uprisings against rulers like Assad in Syria, Mubarak in Egypt.
Which put them at odds with some other Gulf countries.
Big time.
Yeah.
Especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They saw those movements, often linked to political Islamists, as a major threat.
Yeah.
And all that tension eventually led to the big Saudi-led blockade against Qatar in 2017.
Yeah, that was huge. And the report really stresses how significant it is that Trump, who publicly backed that blockade back then,
Right.
is now apparently welcoming Turkish and Qatari investment and involvement in Syria.
It just shows how fast things can change in the region, doesn't it? Alliances shift, priorities change. It's quite dizzying.
Definitely. And it mentions that while some in the U.S. foreign policy world might still worry about what one expert called a Muslim Brotherhood boogeyman,
Yeah, those long-standing concerns about political Islam.
Trump's inner circle, people like the Witkoffs and Barracks mentioned in the analysis, seem to operate differently. They have good ties with Qatar, Saudi, and the UAE.
That's what the reporting suggests. Maybe a different kind of pragmatism, or just different priorities at the top, willing to overlook some older divides to pursue what they see as current interests, even if those concerns linger elsewhere in the U.S. system.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. What about the UAE? Another key player. They had a different strategy in Syria initially, didn't they?
They did, yeah. ME had reported earlier that the UAE was trying to kind of rehabilitate the Assad government, even negotiating to get U.S. sanctions lifted if Assad distanced himself from Iran.
Right, that was their bet. And it obviously didn't pan out with Assad's fall.
No. That effort continued right up until the opposition offensive. Led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from Idlib, overthrew Assad and Ahmed al-Sharaa came to power.
But the UAE hasn't just walked away. They're still involved.
Still involved, yes. Dubai Ports World, the state company, pledged $800 million back in May to upgrade the port of Tartu.
Tartus, okay. Big investment.
And the Al Habtoor Group, another big Emirati company, was apparently sending a delegation too.
So why would the new Syrian leadership under Sharaa welcome that UAE money, especially if they're maybe closer to Turkey and Qatar now?
Well, according to a Syria analyst quoted in the piece, Sharaa might be okay with it because the UAE is seen as agreeable to Russia.
Ah, the Russia connection. Russia has its base in Tartus, right?
Exactly. So Russia might not want, say, Turkey running the port, but the UAE is seen as friendly to Moscow. It gives them an angle. France's CGM already runs Latakia port, for comparison.
So the UAE has an in via Russia, particularly on infrastructure maybe, but the analysis also says the UAE is facing some headwinds elsewhere in the region that might limit their influence.
Right. While TQ seem to be gaining ground in some places, the UAE is reportedly running into trouble where they're on opposite sides. Libya, for example.
They backed Haftar there, right? Who lost?
Yeah, UAE backed Haftar's failed attempt on Tripoli, while Turkey gave key support to the other side in 2020. That was a big setback for the UAE's strategy there.
And Egypt. Even though they backed President el-Sisi, the report says ties are getting strained.
Apparently quite strained, yeah. Egypt's got economic problems. And the UAE, who's been a major backer, is supposedly frustrated about the lack of reforms.
Okay.
MEE even reported the Emiratis lobbied against Egypt in Washington. And then there was the UAE ambassador supporting a plan to displace Palestinians from Gaza that reportedly really spooked Egyptian generals. Very sensitive issue for Cairo.
Wow, yeah, that would cause friction. And Sudan, too. They're backing opposing sides there as well.
Correct. UAE backs the paramilitary RSF, while the Sudanese army gets support from Turkey, Egypt, and Iran. So you see these rivalries playing out across multiple countries.
So bringing it back to Syria, how might these other challenges affect the UAE's standing there, even with the Tartus investment?
Well, one Arab official quoted in the report suggested that Sharaa might take Emirati cash, sure, but maybe won't trust them on security. This official thinks the UAE is kind of on their back foot regionally right now. So maybe they're still a player because of the money and the Russia link, but their overall influence, the trust they have with the new Syrian leadership, might be less compared to Turkey and Qatar.
Right. TQ seem to be building a deeper strategic relationship there.
Exactly. And the analysis sort of positions Syria now as this big test case for the region, especially after that 2021 al-Ula agreement where the Gulf states tried to patch things up after the Qatar blockade.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are closer now, but the report says things are still chilly between Qatar and the UAE and Turkey and the UAE. Syria is where these new complicated relationships are really playing out.
And Saudi Arabia is important here too. Even if they're not funding projects in Syria in this specific report, they're playing a key role behind the scenes.
How so?
The analysis says the Saudis were just as instrumental, if not more, than Turkey and Qatar in getting Trump to lift U.S. sanctions on Syria in the way the new leadership wanted.
Really? What's driving the Saudis?
It's described as their new foreign policy focus. Interest, not emotion or ideology. Pure pragmatism.
Okay.
Riyadh basically wants a stable Syria, so Gulf money can flow in for reconstruction, and they can focus on their own huge economic plans, like Vision 2030. A stable Syria helps them focus domestically. It's an interest shared across the Gulf now.
So, despite all the rivalries elsewhere, when it comes to Syria, Turkey, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, they actually have some shared goals.
According to Robert Ford, yes, they all want a stable transition under Sharaa. And, crucially, they all want to see Sharaa reduce Iran's influence. That's a big common denominator.
Reducing Iran's influence seems key. Okay, what about the new Syrian leadership itself, Ahmed al-Sharaa? How's he approaching things?
Well, the report makes a point of saying Syria is not talking about elections. Not on the agenda right now.
Okay, no democracy push.
Sharaa seems careful not to identify with external political Islamist groups, and doesn't really mention democracy. The focus looks very much like stability first, reconstruction, not political reform right now.
And Israel. That's always a huge factor in Syria.
Always. The UAE, having the closest Gulf ties to Israel now via the Abraham Accords, apparently helped broker secret Syria-Israel talks back in May.
Secret talks, interesting. But Israel's also been active militarily since Assad fell.
Yeah, still conducting airstrikes, holding on to occupied land. So a major worry for everyone, including the U.S., is avoiding accidental clashes, Turks versus Israelis, or Iranians versus Israelis inside Syria. They're trying to de-escalate that risk.
So given all that complexity, the regional players, the security risks, the U.S. pullback, what does Robert Ford think the ultimate U.S. goal is here? Is it about setting up spheres of influence for allies?
Ford dismisses that idea, calls it too 19th century. He says, while the Trump team is fine with TQ, Saudi, UAE investing, their main goal, as he sees it, might be more transactional.
Transactional, how?
Facilitating commerce between Israel and Syria, that's the quote. Less about political control, more about opening up economic channels, maybe even across old enemy lines.
Commerce over control. Okay. So let's try to pull all these threads together from the MEE report and the other analysis. It's a really complex picture.
It absolutely is. You've got the Trump administration shifting strategy, pulling back from direct involvement, and really empowering regional players. Turkey and Qatar stepping up massively.
Right. Alongside the UAE still being involved and maybe facing challenges, and Saudi Arabia playing that key facilitator role, getting sanctions lifted.
And it seems driven by some very pragmatic interests, doesn't it? Economic opportunities in reconstruction, Turkey's deep security concerns about the PKK, SDF, and that shared regional goal of pushing back against Iranian influence.
Yeah, ideology and nation building.
Yes.
That seems much less important right now compared to these sort of hard-nosed interests.
And really understanding this web, the alliances, the rivalries, the shifting calculations, just fundamental if you want to get a handle on Middle East geopolitics today.
Absolutely. And for those of you, as we said, maybe studying for UPSC or similar exams, this kind of specific analysis is gold. It gives you the context behind the headlines, shows how global strategies and regional dynamics collide.
We've seen how Turkey and Qatar are becoming central in Syria, thanks partly to the U.S. shift, and how that fits with what the UAE and Saudis are doing. It's all aimed at stability, but the path there is incredibly complex.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe something for you to chew on after this deep dive.
Yeah, a question to consider, based on what we've discussed from the sources.
Given this huge emphasis by all these outside players on economic deals, on stability, and given that the new Syrian leadership under al-Sharaa doesn't seem focused on political reform or democracy right now, what are the actual long-term chances for real sustainable peace and, legitimate government in Syria?
It's the core question, isn't it? Can you build lasting peace just on commerce and stability deals without addressing deeper political issues, representation, accountability?
Definitely something to think critically about. Consider all the different interests we've talked about and how they might pull Syria in different directions.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this deep dive into what's happening in Syria, in the region, drawing heavily on that Middle East eye analysis.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you found this breakdown useful for understanding this complex situation, maybe for your studies like UPSC, or just staying informed, please do give this deep dive a like.
And subscribe. That way you won't miss our future explorations of important topics.
We'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment below. What are your thoughts? Any further questions on this? Let us know.